Hello, this is Gabe Larson. I'm your host and presenter today for our presentation on sales in the cloud, the high-velocity sales model. Appreciate everybody joining. I know it's Thanksgiving week, but because it was a short week, we thought we'd try to sneak a webinar in, and I think we got a fun one today, so I'm glad you're here. We're going to go ahead and just give a couple more minutes for those who are joining, and while we do that, I'm going to play a short video and clip about one of my favorite passions in life.
Henry decided that he wanted to win Le Mans. He set his sights on the most prestigious race, certainly in Europe at that particular time.
Well, in '65, we struck out again, the little Ferrari taxi cabs were there after midnight and all day long. The next day we were sitting on the sideline, so we had to eat crow again.
Now, for those of you, that unfortunately is not my car. I drive a Honda, but you can always wish. So looks like we've had a bunch more people join here. Again, thanks for joining. I know it's Thanksgiving week, but I think we've got some fun content around high-velocity sales models. I'm going to be your host and presenter. But before I jump on in, just a couple house cleaning items. The first one is this webinar is going to last about an hour if you're lucky. Because it's a short week, I think it'll be shorter than that. Point two is I do want to make this interactive. So if you have a minute, there's a little box down there that says Q&A. You can pull that up. I'm going to be asking a couple questions, and I'd love for you to bug me as much as you can with that Q&A box. And I'll start with this. Please give me your name and where you're from, just so I can get a feel as to who's out there and where you're coming from. Last couple things, this will be recorded, so if you got to jump or you leave early, by all means, we'll make sure that we get it to you in some form or fashion after this presentation is actually completed. I was just going to say, I was thinking we weren't going to get people to actually respond, but we got Rob, Rachel, David, Robert, Steve, coming from New Jersey, Florida. Fantastic. We got a whole group here. So let's go ahead and jump in. And again, please bug me with the Q&A as much as you'd like, because I'd love to chat as I talk here. So my name is Gabe Larson. Super proud to be part of the American Association of Inside Sales Professionals here in Utah. And I also run our momentum team, which is our strategy team that focuses on thinking about people, systems, and processes in the world of sales acceleration. My background includes Accenture and Goldman Sachs and Gallup, but I don't want to bore you with that. I prefer that we jump on into the fun stuff here. So let's get cracking. First and foremost, we recently had, you guys, Jim Steele. I don't know how we tricked him, but we tricked him into coming from Salesforce.com, where he had been the president and worldwide leader of sales for about 15 years. We trick him into coming over to InsideSales.com, and he's been a fabulous addition. But every once in a while, I'll get with Jim and I'll say, Jim, give me a great story or tell me about something, fantastic that happened at Salesforce. And one of the last stories that he told me was this. He said, Gabe, when I first showed up at Salesforce in about 2002, one of the first things I said to Mark Benioff was, okay, where's the sales team? I'd like to meet them. And Mark said back to him, they're right over there. And Jim says, no, I mean the sales team, the ones who actually meet with the customers. These guys are wearing shorts and sitting at cubicles. And Mark replies to him and says, yes, that is actually our sales team. To me, that kind of signifies the beginning of what a lot of people are calling different things. Sales on rails, assembly line sales, a high-velocity sales model. But one thing for sure was the world obviously started changing. And I want to get into this high-velocity sales model, and I want to cover 3 areas within it. The first one is demand generation. You guys have seen the stats. With the boom of the internet and the availability of information, people are saying that almost 60% of the buying decision is made online. We got to be thinking about demand generation. Number 2, I want to cover a couple concepts in just general sales. Boy, through the use of technology, professional sales teams, we know are selling more remote from their prospect. We call it inside selling, but there's some fun technology and some fun things around data and science that are there. And then number 3 is sales operations. There's so much fun to go, I think, into sales operations and the role it can support in sales. But when I think of a high-velocity sales model, you've got to be having demand generation, sales, and sales operations all working seamlessly together. And I want to talk to you about a couple points under each of those. So first and foremost, let's dive into demand generation and some of the points and principles there. So here we go. Here's a stat for you. A couple stats for you by 2 companies. You can see them there in the bottom right-hand corner. The role of demand generation in a sales department. According to Cirrus Decisions, depending on which segment you're dealing with, again, SMB, mid, etc., they've got a study out there that says 25 to 45% of the pipeline should actually be produced from the demand generation function. Wow! Almost 50%, again, depending on the segment, of the pipeline should be produced from demand generation. I got to throw the question out there. This may actually make you mad if your marketing department isn't supporting you, but how much of your pipeline does marketing actually produce? Go ahead and chat it into the Q&A window there. I'd love to see kind of where you are in consideration with Serious Decisions. Okay, so we've got 0. Michael, 0. Michael Bunny says 0. Unfortunately, everybody, that's a pretty typical approach. We got Rob, 99. Shelly, less than 5. Rob, less than 10. So we got a variation. Boy, am I surprised. Oftentimes, we're seeing 0. And if you're running a high-velocity model, you guys, that is not acceptable. It is absolutely not acceptable. Now, the study on the right there says, this is actually from Business to Community, they studied high-growth companies, and they found one of the key differentiators between high growth and average growth. And what does that mean? It was like 15 times faster growth. Those companies were getting 60% of their leads from demand generation. My goodness. So again, when you're thinking high velocity, marketing needs to play a big role. However, no matter how you cut the pie, demand generation will not provide 100% of your pipeline. So you better have a freaking strategy for the other 50%, and I want to dive into that piece right now. So I think we've heard this joke in fact, it's actually, I'd love to hear in the chat window if you think this joke is old or new for you. You can just type old or new, but the odd couple of marketing and sales not actually getting along. Boy, I've heard that for a long time. I know that marketing and sales need to get along. So sometimes I just want to say, shut up, I get it. I know that they need to get together and they need to be all lovey-dovey, et cetera, et cetera. But I almost feel like we've taken it too far. And what I mean by that is we need to maybe take a step back and say, I look like most people fall in that same category. I got Steven saying old, Michael, old, Chase. It's an old joke. So I actually want to take a step back and say, you know what? Marketing, let's not talk about getting together. Let's talk about doing your job. Marketing, no matter how you cut it, you need to be producing almost half of my pipeline. And just go do your job. Sales, you need to quit complaining about what you're getting from marketing, and you need to be thinking about producing the other half of your pipeline. Now, how are you going to do that? Well, marketing, again, I need you to produce 50% of my pipeline, and I need you to do it the following strategy. Killer website with paid and organic search, optimized to the nth degree, a blog and content strategy that rivals HubSpot, permission-based email database with sequencing strategies and drip campaigns, and then an event, social, and video strategy. Boom. Then sales. You've got to produce the other half of your pipeline. And downloading some names from LinkedIn and wasting half your day social selling. I probably shouldn't say that too loud. Social selling isn't a waste of your time, but I think you can all admit that sometimes it can be. But truthfully, that's not a high-velocity model. It's not sales on rails. It's more cowboy. So we've got to have marketing produce their share, and then sales needs to market effectively as if they were marketers to fill their part of the pipeline. Now, how can sales start to think about doing that effectively? Well, I want to introduce a very basic concept, and this is where I try to have sales organizations start to think about their pot, their kind of share of the pie. Who and what? Sales needs to become marketers and learn what the word campaigns mean. Start with this. Who and what? Twice a month, identify a segment of your database or use LinkedIn to target a certain vertical, then decide on how to attack them. What is going to be your offer? It's a webinar, it's an ebook, it's an event, it's a dinner. And then who are you going after? A particular segment. What are you going to offer them? A particular offer, webinar, ebook, etc. And then follow that through in a structured manner. Try to make it simple. Who and what? If sales can start acting more like marketers and marketing can do more of their job, I actually think we can actually get along a little bit better than we normally have. Okay, that's point number one. Now, point number two. Now, notice I'm talking about a high-velocity model here. I'm hitting first demand generation, then I'm hitting sales operations. I'm not touching sales yet. If you want a sales machine, you've got to build a machine. And people often come second or third in that process. So notice that. So this is an interesting one. I've got a question. Throw it in your Q&A box if you can. Who's this guy? You see it right there, Henry Ford. What is he most famous for inventing? Give me your thoughts there. Yeah, so I got a couple people. We got Tom saying the Model T. You got to love that old Model T. You've got David Springer on the production line. Jonathan, the assembly line. Steven just said cars. Steven, that's pretty close. But I'm looking actually for the assembly line and the production line. So, okay, think about it for a minute. Assembly line sales. That's what Henry Ford did to manufacturing. He revolutionized it by creating an assembly line staffed with all kinds of specialists excelling in their individual skill set to contribute to kind of the whole thing. Whether you like it or not, inside sales, you guys, has moved slowly in the same direction. Rather than rely on one person to do everything, prospect and qualify, sell, close, continually manage, we've now started to see a lot of sales specialties along that conveyor belt. Now, what is the conveyor belt in the inside sales structure? So, okay, I've got all these people now in our specialized inside sales structure, but how do we work effectively? What is the conveyor belt that allows us to work in that assembly line sales model? Bam, exactly. Mary got it. It's your CRM. It's your Salesforce. It's your Dynamics. It allows us to all line up and then pass things in a systematic and scientific structure. So we actually did a study, and boy, if anybody has any good data on that, I'm killing. Every time we've got a team of researchers, and they're just starting to do a more in-depth study on this, because there's not a lot of great information on generalist versus specialist and which models are better. But we actually did do a study in partnership with Dr. James Oldroyd. He was a gentleman at MIT at the time, and he fundamentally proved that the generalist model, which is one cowboy doing everything, doing the prospecting and closing and managing, that's not as effective as specifically specializing just your appointment setting and closing activities. He proved that if you do specialize, you actually have a 7-point higher close rate. Now, a lot of people would say, Gabe, I'm a little confused. 7-point higher close rate. If you move to an assembly or velocity model, wouldn't you actually have double the throughput? How come the quality is going up? Feel free if you want to throw an answer in there as to why you think that would happen. But this is the effect of a specialized model. Not only do you have more that comes out, you actually have better quality because people are able to focus on what they do best every day. So I want to take you through this concept of this specialized model and get your feedback as to where you are in this path to specialization. So check this out and type me some of your concept, your comment. So I've broken it out. I've been visiting, I've been at Inside Sales, about 3 years now, and I've seen over 200 different sales models, and I've been trying to wrap my head around it. I've been to 3M and NetApp and DocuSign and Aptus and big and small and, all these different industries. And I've started to see some patterns, and I've just put down a small sample, and you can kind of give me your opinion as to what I'm missing. But let's break it out. So first and foremost is demand generation. Now, that's a function in of itself. B2B, you're typically looking at some form of focus around inbound inquiries, buying, purchasing lists, some sort of events, whether that's online or not, and then this self-sourcing. How that works is slightly different in each organization. Now, a lot of that demand is now flowing into some form of an operations team, marketing or sales ops, and that team is responsible for scoring and making sure we prioritize for the next group to make sure that that handoff is smooth. That next group is, again, BDR, business development, ADR, SDR, PDR, whatever you want to call it. Sales development seems to be catching on a little bit, but boy, that sales development function, you guys, is going crazy. It's being specialized into 5, 10, 15 different roles. You've got the inbound response team on top. That's just your catcher's mitt, right? The team that catches all the inbound generated demand. Then you've got outbound teams that'll be broken out or specialized by segment, by product, by geo. You've got, oh man, one of my favorite down there is that social selling. A lot of people are wasting a lot of time on social selling. So I'm starting to see some organizations say, you know what, we're going to specialize our social sellers. We're going to get a handful of SDRs. They're going to waste their whole day social selling, and they're going to be using different people, executives, for example, their LinkedIn profiles, and they're going to be chatting and initiating contacts. And as soon as they get a fish on the line, they're going to head and throw it over to the sales team as if they were a regular sales development function. Very interesting, very effective. In fact, we've tested it internally. We've got 4 people who are designated social sellers, and we do some fun stuff. If you'd like to chat more about that, hit me up later, as I'm pretty fascinated about that one. Anyway, so channel, segment, a lot of specialization in the SDR role. When it comes to sales, then, sales is mimicking that in a lot of different ways. So you'll have segments, geo, product, and then you'll sometimes see this sales engineer role, although I've been working on an article. I'd love to hear, if you get a minute, chat me your opinion. I'm kind of feeling like we're seeing the death of the sales engineer. Yikes, I hate to say that too loud, but the sales engineers, I was doing some of the research, started with some of these big ERP systems, and you really needed a solution consultant or a sales engineer to get in and really help you out, because there was so much technical specs to figure out. But as we move into this SaaS, more in the SaaS space and the sales acceleration space, the sales engineer role is morphing. It's not just a heavy lifter on the tech. It's becoming more of it like a solution consultant, more of a strategy, a business consultant who can actually not just talk tech, but talk business. So I'm seeing some interesting morphing there. Sounds like you guys are, looks like I've offended. I didn't mean to offend a few of you. Peter, I didn't mean to offend you on saying that if you're a sales engineer, I won't, I'll take that back. And then last but not least is this client success organization. So you've got some interesting things happening here. Certainly you've got an implementation team that'll handle a company for potentially 30, 60, 90 days. You've got a client success or account manager. They're all segmented, again, by territories and products and geos. You've got a support function. And then a newer role here, I've seen it at a few tech companies, is this expansion role. A growth consultant, I've heard it called, but it typically focuses on, upsells and cross-sells, because sometimes that account manager or client success person can't get to that in their day-to-day grind. So my goodness, you guys, look at this. 20, 30 years ago, you had one person trying to do all of this. And now you literally have 20 to 30 people working on this assembly line model, handing off and seeing more throughput and better quality as you go through this kind of velocity concept. It's almost mind-boggling to me. Now, I'd love to answer some questions. If you've got questions on this, this sometimes has been, I've been showing this slide to a couple people, and people are like, wow, this can't be, or how do you do this, or how do you compensate? Boy, if you're going to go to this model, there's some real things you need to be thinking about. One of the biggest is, the handoff. You go into, I actually worked for Toyota in the Middle East, worked right on the manufacturing plant, and watched the assembly line model. That Toyota way, you've got to watch for defects as you watch every handoff go through the system. Andrew made a great point here. Yeah, and I would agree. Focus. If you're going to do something like this, you've got to be focusing and thinking through these areas pretty strategically. So a lot of people say, okay, I get it. That's pretty intense. I don't know if I'm quite ready for that. How would I start thinking about a path to specialization? I got to interrupt. Josh Rose, great comment here. Josh says, we are, which is why client satisfaction and solution satisfaction is going lower. So, Josh, you're of the opinion that as you move to this model, it sounds like, you've actually seen client satisfaction drop a little bit. Yeah, that may be the case. I mean, again, one of the things you've got to watch out for is you've got to watch for those handoffs, because if a client is going to talk to 4 or 5 people, you've got to be a little bit careful in the way that they do that. So let's jump to this path to specialization. And again, if you have questions, I'm seeing some of these questions come in. I'll try to answer them as they come. So this path to specialization, let's go through top to bottom. If you were going to go on this journey, how would I recommend you do it? First and foremost, you start with the generalist. Again, this is the guy who's doing everything. Cradle to grave, prospect to close, the whole kit and caboodle. The first step you're typically going to take is splitting your hunters and your farmers. Now, Chris Fay asked a question, said, hey, can you speak to hunters and farmers? We'll talk about it here briefly. Does the field salesperson continue to manage the account, or are they responsible for hunting only? Typically in a high-velocity model, in a assembly line model, you would split it, Chris. You would say sales closes, goes up to the close, and then hands it off to the account manager, and they run it from there. If you have the salesperson do too much of the account management, you're breaking the law of specialization, and you're ruining the high-velocity model. Now, again, we're talking high velocity here. If you've got a ticket item of $5 million and your sales cycle is 3 years, I apologize. You probably shouldn't be on this webinar. That's pretty difficult to run a high velocity model with. That's an enterprise or strategic model, and I'd have a completely different strategy. This is 30, 60, 90-day sales cycle, anything under $1 million, and you could probably even argue that. So you need to be thinking, are you going high velocity, are you going blended, or are you going strategic? That's an important decision to make on that one, Chris. So I'd probably start breaking up your sales and account management, and in a high velocity model, I'd cut it pretty black and white. Now, there's some things we could talk about. How long does sales get compensated on upsells, and yada, yada, yada. Don't really care about it. But from a principle standpoint, I'd probably go pretty black and white on this first step. Now, the next step is then taking your sales and breaking them out between that appointment setter and that closer. That's usually what I recommend is step 3, and that appointment setter becomes a blended appointment setter. That's an inbound and outbound, okay? Now, after that, you then start segmenting your closers into a variety of options. They're the geo segment product. And then I'd take my lead gen people as step 5, and I'd break them out into your inbound response catcher mitt, and then also your outbound kind of cold callers, social sellers, whatever you want to define that as. Lastly, typically I'd say lastly in a velocity model, more organizations will do this as their last step. They'll take that account management role, and they'll go ahead and split that into that strategic growth consultant and then that success manager. Now, a good question by Andrew says, hey, I've got a startup. Don't you have to start with the generalist model before segmenting into specialties? Exactly, Andrew, and I think that's fitting at the moment. That's why this path to specialization is pretty powerful. You'd start with the generalist, and then you would take step 2, 3, and 4, and this is the path I'd recommend. Now, when is the right time? It looks like Emily's asked a question. When is the right time to do this? And it looks like Josh, you kind of mentioned it as well. Look, when's the right size of an organization to handle this? When I was at InsideSales.com, I worked here about 15 years ago. I ran the sales team, and there was, 10 sales? There was probably 15 people in the company, 5 to 10 salespeople. And we did have a handful of appointment setters and a handful of closers. So to me, there's not really a right time. I typically try to go by the 20% rule. Whenever one of your people is spending more than 20% of their time doing a different task besides the one they're being paid for. So, for example, they're paid on closing, but they're spending more than 20% of their time finding leads, prospecting, looking for people, then I would probably break that out. So, Josh, Emily, I'd probably say the 20% rule is a good place to start. But honestly, the sooner you can go to this, I would say the better. Assume a large early stage. Yeah, okay. I'll get to that question in a little bit, Ian. Any other questions on this specialized model, you guys? This is so important. I'm a big believer that you got to get the structure right. Then you got to get the process. Then you get the systems, and then you get the people. I mean, I know that's a little bit backwards, but I come from more of an engineering and computer programming background, so I'm a little bit biased. Yeah. Okay, good. Ask any of those questions, and we'll go ahead and answer those in a minute. Let's continue on here. So let's look at the next piece in sales operations. So you've now got the structure nailed down. However, if you've got the structure, you need to be thinking about really the process underneath that structure. So, okay, you've identified I've got these different types of roles. How does a lead move from one piece of the structure to the next? You've got to start thinking about that process. Now, Hal, you mentioned the question on blended. What do I mean by blended? When I say blended, you guys, in the concept of sales structure, that would be somebody who's doing two roles. They would be an inbound and outbound appointment setter. That's a blended SDR function where they take inbound leads, but they also cold call, quote unquote, cold call out to lists or, non-interested prospects. So let's dive into the process piece. I forgot I put this quote in. I've never mapped out my sales process beginning to end. Said every single person on this phone call, I'm sure. It's embarrassing. We've got a study here by CSO that says only 25% of companies actually have a documented and adopted sales process. Prove me wrong out there. I'd like to see how many of you have actually taken the time to literally chart out in Visio or some sort of charting software, PowerPoint for all I care, your entire sales process beginning to end. Come on. And I don't want liars. I want the truth. Bill, thank you. That's what I'm looking for. No, haven't done it. Thought about it. Thinking about it does not actually count. Mari, no, with an UG. Bernie, okay, yes, we have. We have a document. I'd like to see what Mark says here. Mark does say we have a documented sales process. Does building a record type-based business process and FDSC count? I'm not talking, Andrew, about in Salesforce saying we go from leads to accounts and we build opportunities. I'm talking about I want to see an actual sales process beginning to end. Neil, thanks for your honesty. I'm feeling it's about 25% of you guys. I'm sorry, but I think CSO is. Michael, you're saying you're working on it. Not going to cut it, man. Not in my book. Okay, great. So we've got a few people. I would challenge you to do that. Again, I come from a process and computer programming background, so I'm a big believer. If you haven't done this, I would challenge you to do it. I like to break processes down into 3 phases, like a lead acquisition, some sort of contacting cadence, and then a qualification and close. Doesn't need to be super fancy. I put a sample here that I actually did I had one of my guys do for a client in PowerPoint. It's ugly. I think a lot of people get caught up in, well, you're not using the right, process mapping, nomenclature. Don't care. Seriously, don't care. If you have a comment around that, what I want to see is that you've taken the time to put it on paper, step by step, how we get leads, how we contact, what's our cadence, how we structure that, and then what do we do with that? And then I love when people overlay it with some numbers like you've seen here. We also have highlighted some of the inefficiencies with kind of these big red balls, but you've got to get to a current state functionality so that you can then say, boom, let's figure out where we're strong and weak. Let's simplify that thing, and then we'll have a future state that we can continue to iterate and have a governance program around. Not that complicated, but you'll notice just in this example, and honestly, guys, I've probably created over 200 of these. It's like an addiction. Once you start doing it, you want to keep doing it and doing it. Notice the difference here, the simpleness, complex to simple. Once you visualize it, and feel free if you want to send me your process map. Like I said, I look at these at night and on the weekends because this is where the magic happens. I feel like sometimes people are saying, hey, I bought this tool or that tool and it didn't increase my sales. And I say, well, no kidding. No kidding. You thought the tool systems were saviors? You've got to get your structure. You've got to get your process. Then you'll know which tools you need and how to use those tools. Then you overlay those tools on an optimized process, and now we're talking about high velocity, you guys. That's high velocity. A lot of people are asking me here, where should you build your process map? Again, Visio, Excel, I don't, PowerPoint, I'm happy to get all, wherever. I've got a question from Andrew saying, hey, things get hard when you have multi-channel triggering. Yeah, as you move into more of a complex organization, channel is always more difficult. As you dive deeper into your client success org, I think, who asked me that here? Yeah, whoa, Linisha. That's great. Sorry if I said that wrong. Does this include a piece on account execs? As you dive into different functional areas of your sales org, right? Your client success, your account execs, your SDR, you would probably need a process map for each of those, and you'd need to watch the handoffs. So here's kind of my keys on really getting your process map to where it should be. Number one, get the functional areas figured out. Number two, and this isn't rocket science, so I'm a little embarrassed I'm saying this, but number two, get your stinking as is. Just get it down on paper. It doesn't need to be pretty. Just get it down and get it over to me. Number two, then we can start talking about strengths and weaknesses. Then we'll create a future state. And then the last is we got to have some sort of governance structure so that we can iterate on this and visit it every month or 3 months to make sure we don't need to continue to move forward on it. Super basic, but I challenge you to do it, because if you don't have that, it's hard for someone like me. I have a hard time talking. Our sales aren't improving. Well, talk to me about how you actually do it. I want to see your velocity model on paper before we actually talk about what needs to be fixed or not be fixed. Good. Okay. Next. Okay, I'm finally getting to sales here. We've talked about demand gen. We've talked about structure and process. Okay, now let's talk about the actual sales play and a couple issues that you want to be thinking about in a high velocity model. Number one is this concept of the law of prioritization. I refer to it as the law because, as dumb as it sounds, I think it's a little bit like gravity. Whether you believe it or not, the law of prioritization is working. Some of your leads, accounts, or contacts are closing better than others, and by licking your finger and putting it up in the air and subjectively choosing, you are breaking the law of prioritization. I love this study. This is, again, by Sears. They're saying that 68% of reps' time is spent researching and not actually calling. I call it the Salesforce stare. I've shadowed thousands of reps. One of the things I love to do is just go see how reps actually are implementing a velocity model. And I see them sometimes just stare at the computer. Just the Salesforce stare. They just look. They can't figure out who to call, when to call, how to call, who. It's hard because they've got so much to look at. So prioritization is, I think, a very real problem. How do we get around that? Well, let me talk to you about a couple things. Michael, great question on how do we coach our leaders to adapt to this kind of whole strategy faster. Michael, this is one of those things where I don't know. You need to get somebody there. Let me back up, Michael, because a lot of people ask me, Gabe, if I have an inside sales function, what kind of person am I looking to run it? And I say it's definitely not someone with outside sales experience. If you want a velocity model, No offense to you guys who have a lot out. I carried a bag for 5 years. I sold a $10 million deal. I get it. Most of your outside salespeople, they only care about the close. They care about smoking stogies on the golf course, shaking hands, relationship-based sales. That's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is call center people. A little too detailed in their metrics sometimes. So I usually am a little bit hesitant there. What I've typically found to be a great inside sales leader is somebody who has sales operations background, someone who understands that we're talking about a machine. If you can get that person, Michael, teaching somebody some of these principles, and if it's not part of their DNA, like kicking bricks, man, you've got a fun one there. Just good luck on it. Let's talk about prioritization for just a minute. Sorry for the digression, but this is tough. A true velocity model. You know, one of the things maybe, Michael, you could ask is in your interview questions, when you ask somebody what's the first thing they do as an inside sales leader and they come on board, don't get me wrong, but if they start with people, that's sometimes an indication that they don't understand that a system machine needs to be built, and then we need to see if people can work within that machine. That's maybe a way you could start to filter out some people as well. Okay, let's move on. Prioritization. A lot of studies out there. I was looking at a client we did a webinar just with last week. Their very best leads were closing at almost 10 times the rate of their worst leads, as we did some kind of analytics around it. The problem is, I mentioned, every sales rep, those yellow bars, they're spending equal time on good and bad. You have got to find a way to follow the law of prioritization and align your effort with your best people. How do you do it? Well, here's kind of my 5 levels of prioritization, and I want you to chat in the Q&A window what level you think you are in the company. Level 1, I let my sales reps prioritize however the heck they want. Number 2, my sales reps use such things as time zone or new leads that come in as ways to be able to prioritize their actions or activities. Number 3, we've actually taken some time to figure out which lead sources are most effective to work on, or which industries we actually close better than others. Number 4, you've taken the time to actually build a marketing score. Now, there's some issues with marketing scores, but stick with me for a minute. You've taken the time in Marketo or HubSpot or some other marketing automation score, and you've got some MQL or marketing automation score. And then number 5, you've taken the time and you actually have a predictive scoring system, ideally with a prescriptive system to actually act on the score. You wouldn't believe, everybody, and I don't mean to knock it, but boy, there's a lot of predictive analytic companies. They all come in and they say, hey, we're going to score your data, and then you're going to close better, and it's going to be, happy, and you're all going to be happy. The problem is, you guys, I'm monitoring these sales reps. I'm sitting with them, and I ask them, I say, oh, what do you think of that score there? And these reps say, oh, I love it. I don't know what that crappy thing is. I don't. Yeah, it's my manager said something about it, but I do whatever the heck I want. Oh, we just spent thousands on a predictive scoring system, then the reps do whatever they want because we've not taken the time to build a system around the score. You've got to watch out for that. Huge problem in the industry as to why some of this predictive stuff is not actually working. So let's see some of the scores here. Michael saying he's got 5. Andrew, yep, that makes sense. I'll try to answer that a little later. We've got David said 4. Rob, we've got 1, but they do actually use 2, 3, and 4. I think that's probably pretty true, Rob. It's, pretty honest in your feedback on they're probably using 1, but they use a little bit of 2, 3, and 4. We are stage 2, says Christy, but we're looking to get to stage 3. 2, Tony. 3, yeah. See, guys, we're all over the map here. It's think about the law of prioritization. figure out how you can start to move into level 5. But again, caution on level 5. It becomes level 1 if you allow your reps to do whatever they want when you have level 5. So be very conscientious of that. Great. Let's move on to our last piece here. Oh, my goodness, the time. I'm just yip-yapping here. Let's dive into Cadence. We're to our last piece. So big buzzword in the industry. I do like Cadence. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about it. Let's dive into it for a minute. So we've got data that says any lead that enters your system, you buy it, it's an event, it's an inbound lead. The average number of phone calls is sitting at 1.5. Tell me if you believe that. Give me a yes and no. Is that what your team is doing? Leads that are basically generated or purchased, the average phone call per lead is sitting at about 1.5. Some people are saying yes. Some people are saying no. I'm always surprised. I love to do independent audits of this, and I'm often finding that, yes, we're hovering at about 2. So we've got to figure out a better cadence, and I would prefer that you systematize it. Robert, looks like you're more in the 6 to 8. Melanie's more in the 1. Appreciate you being honest there. Here's what I would consider a bad cadence, and I'm trying to start to name some of these cadences. It's the every other day cadence. Day 1, we'll do an email and a voicemail. Day 3, we'll do an email and a voicemail and a dial. And then day 5, we'll do an email and a voicemail. You kind of just pound them. You do it every other day. There's not much data or science in it. What's the problems with this one? Type in here, what is this bad, or what are some of the things that are bad or good on this? Yeah, so Mark, 1.5, I'm surprised that 1.5 is the industry average, but when you do independent, I've done this thousands of times, I'm often finding it is more in the 1 to 5. Christy, 2 to 2 points, Christy's mentioning Mark, she's at 2, so yeah, 3, Tom, you're saying 3.4. So, what's kind of wrong with this cadence? So 3 dials, we just talked about that. Is that optimal? We would argue that it's not optimal. Hitting them with a voicemail and an email every time, every other day, I'd maybe mix that up. Guys, on cadence, there's a little bit of an art and a science. Let me see if I can take you through some of the concepts here. But again, I do want to emphasize there's a little bit of an art and a science here. Mark said, on the last one, you risk becoming classified in the nuisance category. Mark, I'd argue with you probably on that one. I'm more of a believer you hit them and you hit them hard. Tom, we got someone on the line called Tom Hanks. I love it. I got to answer his question, right? Does the average call cadence depend on how quickly we call after the lead is received? Absolutely, Tom. You'd want to break out your cadence different for inbound leads versus, meaning stuff generated from demand gen, versus cold calling or outbound leads, stuff you just purchased. So what you're looking at here is maybe a good cadence from inbound generated leads or prospects. So believe it or not, for my inbound team here at InsideSales.com, some of you may know this, but we'll often call up to 6 times in the first few days. I mean, guys, we want to hustle, and we want to hustle fast. So we're going to try to get them on the phone within 5 minutes, and then we're going to hit them pretty hard in the first couple of days. So I usually like to go a little more aggressive, but let me give you a couple of the art and the science here. So you'll notice day 1 and day 2, I'm going to get probably 4 dials in. That's pretty aggressive. And then I'm going to mix up my email and voicemail throughout kind of my 10 business day cycle. Most of the stuff we've looked at is over 10 business days, you want to be calling 6 to 10 times. 10 times more on the inbound generated leads, 6 times on more of the cold calling or list purchasing leads. And then you want to back that up with 3 emails and 3 voicemails. In fact, I should have thrown in kind of our study on voicemails there, but that 3 email, 3 voicemail is about where you want to hover. Again, on this one, I went ahead and put 4. because I liked adding a little more flavor, but there's some best practice in here, kind of that 6-3-3 model, 6 calls, 3 emails, 3 voicemails. But then there's a little bit of an art and a science as to how you maneuver around that. So Dan, I don't actually have in here a good cadence on outbound. If you want to shoot me an email after, I could send you one. But again, from a high level, you want to look more like at those 6 phone calls and then 3 emails, 3 voicemails over a 2-week time frame. Then you want to recycle it and then bring it back, 30, 60, 90 days later after the drip campaign's been hitting on it. Are you aware of any stats validated, love that estimate the number of contacts needed to take a cold call to close? Again, our study was talking mostly, not all the way to close, but to opportunity creation or conversion. And that was, you were looking at basically 6 to 8 phone calls. I usually run this report that you're talking about for every one of my clients. But to answer your question, no, Ian, I've not seen an external one. But I typically am finding it's hard though, Ian, because you have one call closes sometimes, and you've got multiple calls. And again, I'm thinking about my velocity clients. So most of the time, I'm seeing on average 3 phone calls, 3 to 4, hovers right the 3 to 4 on average number of phone calls for closes. Again, this is very high velocity. But to get somebody on the phone often takes a lot longer, right? We got so many good questions, you guys. So let's continue on, and maybe we can jump into a couple of these questions. So as I finish it up here, high velocity model, 5 key things you should probably be thinking about: demand generation, marketing, do your freaking job, sales, you do your freaking job, right? The law of specialization, you've got to be thinking about your structure. Then you got to be thinking about how that process works within the structure. Be thinking about things, how they be handed off, how structure, different functions are working together. Then once you actually have the person on the seat, 2 great rules or prioritizations in Cadence. Know that the law of prioritization, some stuff is closing better than others. How are you aligning effort to your best leads? And then lastly, Cadence. Do we make sure that we structure our follow-up and our reach-out in a way so that we follow the prioritization model, so that we actually focus on our best people and give them the effort that they need? So let's move to the end here. Again, I know a couple of you had to jump. This is a recording, so we will tomorrow email you out the link. Feel free to share it to colleagues. Take advantage. There's a couple resources here in one of these windows on this screen. Grab a couple of those. By all means, grab me on LinkedIn or hit me up on Twitter. Would love to debate you on a couple of these things, or talk to you about building a high velocity model. It's a strategy you've got to decide. Are you going velocity or are you not? A lot of people can't answer that question, and I think that's probably the place you want to start. So please do add me on LinkedIn, grab me on Twitter, and then we've got just a couple minutes here. Let's go through a couple of these questions. My voice is starting to run out here. Let's see. Prevent what I call prospect cleanness. Tired. Are there any refreshments, James? Unfortunately, there's not going to be any refreshments. That's a good one. I'm going to pop into this. Let's see. Hearing a lot of leads accounts. I'm interested in how your team thinks about difference between the two. Okay, so SFDC nomenclature, the difference between leads, accounts, and contacts. This is an interesting one. I'd love for you to chat me if you get a minute, or put it in your Q&A. If you're using the leads as your primary tool prospecting within Salesforce, or you're using the account object as your primary tool within Salesforce. typically, guys, what I would say, so everyone, just so we're on the same page, leads and accounts are two different objects within Salesforce. Oftentimes, the standard way Salesforce is designed is that you would, as a new entity, be a lead, someone who is unqualified or a hand raiser. Once that person goes through a structured qualification process using such terms as BANT or ANUM or some form of qualification, you would then convert that person to an account and they would become a contact as they continue down the sales process. However, a lot of companies are working out of accounts as their primary prospecting function because of the ability that account can have multiple contacts, whereas a lead can just have one contact. I would say often in a high-velocity model, Cole, companies are working in the leads object. It's nice because my SDR function can work in the leads and my closer function can work in the accounts, and we can run some reporting associated with that. There's not really a right and wrong. I typically do like to, if you're a strategic model, I'll often push people more into the account model because, again, they need to talk to multiple people in an account and there's more sophistication to it. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea there. Let's see, Christina. What would be best for companies, public programs that may not have funding? I wouldn't to bombard them. So I think Christina, you're talking about the concept of prospecting and reaching out to clients. I would say a lot of people feel like you're bombarding, especially salespeople. Gabe, if I called 6 to 10 times, I would tick a company off. They'd hate me. The interesting thing is, Christina, if we're on the same page here, is when we did that study on 6 to 10 phone calls, a lot of the a lot of the qualitative feedback when we talk to some of these busy decision makers was they expect to be called 6 to 10 times. Sales rep, that's the problem. Sales reps are like, I don't want to hurt anybody's feeling, and I should only call them once. Busy decision makers say, if you want to get a hold of me, I expect you to call me a lot. So I'd say be more aggressive and then back off, but I come from old school sales here. Let's see, Tony, if you use texting, would you add that to the Cadence? At InsideSales.com, we've got a texting tool along with some other fun tools, as some of you know. Texting, we just did a big communication study, Tony, on in B2B what methods of communication people are using and prefer to use. Texting is interesting. If you want to hit me up after, I'd be happy to kind of walk you through it. But, busy decision makers, texting is a huge tool. The problem is it still can't be used as a primary prospect tool. It's got to be used once initial contact has been made. So I'm a big believer, as I coach reps, you've got to ask for cell phone numbers as soon as possible and then start using that pretty wisely. First place is appointment reminders. You can use text as appointment reminders in your prospecting function as a sales development rep, and you can really do some positive damage. We got a couple more minutes. What do we get here? Andrew, Cole. Some of our junior reps, let's see what Cole has to say here. Some of our junior reps are responsible for prospecting 50% of their leads, while the other 50% comes from the lead gen team. Is that a bad idea? I mean, I usually would need to kind of dive in, Cole, and see it, but my first thought is yes, it is, depending on how much you're paying them. So if we just broke it down and said, you're paying these reps $100,000, or probably not, but let's say you are. They're spending 50% of their time finding leads. So, again, just using basic numbers here, for one rep, that would be $50,000 you're spending on lead generation. Okay, what could we do with $50,000? Well, we could buy the best leads in all of the entire world. That's one thing you could do. You could also hire an intern maybe for, $10 an hour who could do the lead gen for you and put the rest of that money in lead gen. Or you could outsource. I've got two great companies in India who are awesome list builders, and they don't charge $50,000. They charge quite a bit less, and they would be able to get you probably better lists than your lead gen guys are doing, spending 50% of their time. So, Cole, at first impressions, I usually say, yeah, you're breaking the law of specialization here. We probably need to be 50%. Again, I'm for the 20% rule. So most of my indications would be saying, yeah, you're probably in the wrong there. But we could always double click on it. Oh, man, more questions, not enough time, but a lot of fun. High velocity model. Again, feel free to connect with me. Really appreciate your time. Had a heck of a time. Great questions, you guys. Look forward to working with you in the future, and we're going to go ahead and sign off. Thanks again.